I just know I've lost my best friend.
This morning, a friend of Nolan Wells, who was with the 18-year-old the day he was last seen alive, is sharing what he says happened during a July 4th boat trip to an isolated barrier island off the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Trayston Shepard declined to speak with us on camera because he says he and his friends are getting threats.
We did no wrong here, and we don't understand how we're getting so much hate behind it. We all cared and loved Nolan, and nobody wanted to see Nolan die. Nobody wanted to see his life be taken so short.
Shepard says he took a boat back from Horn Island in the late afternoon, but Wells stayed behind with a girl he had met.
They met that day, and it was kind of one of those things. It did come off that day that he really did like her, but that was the only time they've ever hung out, was at Horn Island on July 4th.
If the situations were reversed, if the circumstances were reversed, and it was 3 black boys who took a white boy out, and the 3 black boys came back and the white boy did not, it wouldn't matter that they didn't know what happened. Those 3 black boys would have been in handcuffs. Those 3 black boys would still be in questioning to this day. I can see the Fox News headline now, right? They would have used it as proof. See, we told you black people were dangerous. We told you black.
And we know he's with God, and that we will not forget him or the joy that he's brought to us.
And new developments tonight in the case of a Mississippi football standout who was found dead after the 4th of July weekend. Now, this case has drawn national attention, and now 2 civil rights figures are getting involved.
It's 4:30 in the afternoon on July 4th, 2026. A boat is pulling away from Horn Island, a quiet barrier island off the Mississippi Gulf Coast. The music is fading into the distance. Teenagers are laughing, talking about the day, already thinking about fireworks and the rest of the holiday. But one seat is empty. An 18-year-old college football player named Nolan Wells is no longer on that boat. Hours later, his family will realize no one knows where he is. 3 days later, his body will be found floating in the waters surrounding the same island. And almost immediately, one simple question will divide an entire country. Was this a tragic accident? Or is there far more to Nolan's final hours than anyone has admitted? Because the deeper you look into this case, the stranger becomes conflicting timelines, a reported argument investigators want footage of, a cell phone surrounded by questions, viral social media posts making explosive claims that have never been officially verified, and a grieving mother forced to battle not only the loss of her son, but fake videos created with artificial intelligence pretending to speak in her voice. This isn't just a story about how someone died. It's a story about what happens when the truth disappears before the evidence can catch up. Before we go any further, I want to ask you for one small favor. Every case we cover represents a real family searching for answers they still don't have. Nolan's family is living through that pain right now. If you believe stories like this deserve careful attention, not rumors, not sensationalism, but honest conversations that keep the search for truth alive, please take a second to like this video, subscribe to Mystora Crimes, and turn on notifications. It may seem like a small action, but every view helps keep these cases in the public eye. And sometimes public attention is what keeps an investigation moving forward. Nolan Xavier Wells wasn't known for creating problems. If anything, the people closest to him described someone who naturally brought people together. He had recently graduated from Ocean Springs High School, where he played football, and had already begun building the next chapter of his life as a wide receiver at Southwest Mississippi Community College. At 18 years old, the future looked exactly the way most parents hope it does. Football, friends, family, new opportunities. But what stands out most about Nolan isn't found in a stat sheet. It's something his mother later shared with the world. The night before he disappeared, Nolan cooked dinner for his parents. Not because anyone asked him to, not because it was a special occasion. His mother had worked a long day, so Nolan decided to make baked salmon for the family. It's such an ordinary moment that most families would never think twice about it. Yet after a tragedy, ordinary moments become priceless. Psychology tells us that after losing someone unexpectedly, our minds cling to the smallest memories because they're the last pieces of normal life before everything changes. For Nolan's family, that dinner would become one of those memories. His mother would later describe him as someone who loved everyone, someone who wanted peace, someone who never met a stranger. Those descriptions matter, not because they prove anything about what happened next, but because understanding who a person was helps us understand why the people who love them struggle to accept simple explanations. After spending the night at a friend's house, Nolan woke up on the morning of July 4th ready for what should have been another summer adventure. The destination was Horn Island. If you've never heard of it, Horn Island isn't your typical beach. It's one of Mississippi's barrier islands, part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore. Beautiful, remote, and almost completely undeveloped. There are no restaurants, no stores, no lifeguards, very little infrastructure. Cell phone service is unreliable, and the only practical way to reach the island is by private boat. Once you're there, you're largely on your own. That isolation is part of its beauty. But in a missing persons investigation, that same isolation becomes one of the greatest obstacles investigators can face. Photos taken that day show what appears to be a normal 4th of July gathering. Boats line the shoreline. Teenagers laugh together in the water. Friends pose for pictures with their arms around each other. Nothing in those images hints at the questions that would soon consume an entire community. Looking back now, one photograph has drawn particular attention online. Nolan stands among a group of friends, smiling like everyone else. It would later be noted that he appeared to be the only black teenager in that particular friend group. At the time, no one in the photograph seemed concerned by that fact. It was simply a group of friends spending Independence Day together. But history has a way of changing how people interpret photographs. And before the sun had finished setting on July 4th, what looked like an ordinary holiday will become one of the most debated true crime cases in America. Because somewhere between those smiling photographs and the boat leaving the island, something happened. And depending on who you believe, that moment changed everything. As the afternoon stretched on, Horn Island looked exactly the way hundreds of 4th of July celebrations usually do. Music drifted across the water. Boats were anchored along the shoreline. Teenagers moved from one group to another, talking, swimming, laughing, taking pictures that would later flood social media. If you had walked past Nolan Wells that afternoon, nothing would have suggested his life was only hours away from ending. But investigations are rarely built on photographs. They're built on timelines. And this is where Nolan's story begins to split into two very different versions. According to the friends who were with him, the boat they had arrived on began experiencing mechanical problems. Reports indicate there were concerns about the bilge pump and the vessel taking on water. Around 4:30 that afternoon, the decision was made to head back to the mainland. Their account has remained largely consistent. They say Nolan decided to stay behind on Horn Island because he believed he could catch another ride back later with someone else. One family member of a teenager on the trip, who is also a county judge, later publicly stated that her son cooperated fully with investigators, provided a detailed timeline of the day, and even contacted the Coast Guard when Nolan couldn't be located later that evening. If that's exactly what happened, then the mystery becomes heartbreaking rather than criminal. But investigators rarely stop with one version of events, because another account surfaced that painted a very different picture. Attorney Ben Crump, representing Nolan's family, revealed that another young woman who was reportedly on Horn Island that afternoon told investigators she had spoken with Nolan shortly before he disappeared. According to Crump, she remembered Nolan saying he was heading back to Lee with his friends, not planning to remain on the island. It's a small difference, just one conversation. But psychologically, small differences often become the biggest cracks in an investigation. If Nolan intended to leave with his friends, why wasn't he on the boat? If he truly chose to stay behind voluntarily, why does another witness remember the conversation differently? Neither version has been proven false. Neither has been conclusively verified. They simply cannot both be entirely correct. And then investigators made a request that immediately caught public attention. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office asked anyone who had original, unedited photos or videos from Horn Island to come forward, especially footage showing what they described as an alleged altercation involving Nolan. Notice what they didn't say. They didn't announce that a fight caused his death. They didn't accuse anyone of committing a crime. Instead, they wanted the original recordings. That distinction matters. Investigators often seek original files because they contain more than just images. Timestamps, metadata, and unedited sequences can reveal exactly when something happened, who was nearby, and what occurred before and after the moment captured on camera. A 15-second clip posted online can tell one story. The full, unedited recording may tell another entirely. At the same time, social media began producing its own version of events. Screenshots spread rapidly across Facebook and other platforms from an individual claiming to have witnessed an argument involving Nolan. The posts alleged there had been a dispute over a cell phone, named several teenagers who were allegedly involved, and described Nolan as calling out for his mother during the confrontation. Other posts even claimed he was later seen injured. These allegations spread across the internet within hours. But there's an important line that cannot be crossed. None of those specific claims have been officially confirmed by investigators. And even online, some people question whether the anonymous account behind the post was genuine after they were unable to verify the person's identity. Psychologically, this is something we see in almost every high-profile case. When official information moves slowly, uncertainty creates a vacuum, and human beings are uncomfortable with unanswered questions. We naturally begin connecting dots, even when some of those dots haven't been verified. Rumors spread because they offer something the truth often can't in the early stages of an investigation: certainty. As investigators sorted through interviews, videos, and conflicting accounts, Nolan's family was facing a far more terrifying reality. Their son wasn't answering his phone. No one knew where he was. And with every passing hour, hope became harder to hold on to. As darkness settled over the Mississippi Gulf Coast, the celebration was ending for everyone except one family that didn't yet know their lives had changed forever. Nolan never came home, according to public reports. Concern began to grow later that evening, when friends realized they couldn't reach him. A call was eventually made to the Coast Guard around 11 p.m., followed by Nolan's mother contacting the Jackson County Sheriff's Office around midnight to report her son missing. At first glance, those details don't seem unusual. Missing person cases often begin with confusion. Friends assume someone caught another ride. Parents think plans simply changed. Everyone expects the missing person to answer the next phone call. Psychologists sometimes call this the normalcy bias. Our brains naturally reject worst-case scenarios because accepting them means admitting something terrible may already have happened. It's why people often spend precious hours convincing themselves that everything is probably fine. But by the following day, it was becoming painfully clear that this wasn't a misunderstanding. One aspect of the timeline quickly became a point of public discussion. Reports indicate the Coast Guard received an initial call that night, but did not immediately begin a search because the situation did not yet meet the threshold for deployment based on the information available. Later, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office formally requested Coast Guard assistance the following day. For Nolan's family, those hours felt endless. For others following the case, they became another unanswered question. Was it simply the result of procedures between different agencies, a communication gap, or did investigators initially believe Nolan had safely arranged another ride from the island, making the situation appear less urgent than it would later become? At this stage, there are no public findings suggesting misconduct by investigators, but in investigations, perception matters almost as much as reality. Every unanswered question has a potential to erode public trust. Then came the call no parent ever wants to receive. On July 7th, 3 days after Nolan disappeared, a National Park Service ranger discovered a body in the waters near the northwestern end of Horn Island. Dental records confirmed the devastating truth. It was Nolan Wells. The official statement from Coroner Bruce Lind added another layer of mystery. He said there were no immediately obvious signs of trauma or foul play visible during the preliminary examination. For some people, that sounded reassuring. For others, it raised even more questions. It's important to understand what that statement actually means and what it doesn't. No obvious trauma is not the same as saying nothing happened. It doesn't determine how someone entered the water. It doesn't answer whether there was an altercation beforehand. It doesn't establish whether a medical emergency occurred, whether alcohol played a role, or whether drowning was accidental. Those answers depend on a full autopsy, toxicology testing, and the broader investigation. But while investigators were waiting for science to provide answers, Nolan's family found themselves focused on something else entirely: his cell phone. According to attorney Ben Crump, the family was told Nolan's phone had been returned to them by friends. Crump later said the family believed messages had been deleted before the phone was handed back.
So when we made it home, my sister and I actually went through Nolan's cell phone, particularly Snapchat, because that is so popular with the children. And when we opened it up, there was nothing. There were no saved pictures. There were no snaps from that day. And we did open it before the 24-hour expiration.
Authorities have not publicly confirmed that allegation, and it remains one of several unresolved questions in the case. Still, from a psychological perspective, it's easy to understand why the phone became such a focal point. In today's world, our phones are more than devices. They're timelines. They record conversations, movements, relationships, and decisions. When investigators examine a phone, they're not just looking for texts. They're reconstructing a person's final hours. For Nolan's family, every missing message represented another piece of a puzzle they feared might never be complete. Their lack of confidence in the process led them to take an extraordinary step. They retained renowned civil rights attorney Ben Crump and arranged for an independent autopsy outside Mississippi, hoping a second examination would answer the questions the first one could not. Instead of bringing closure, Nolan's death was becoming something else entirely. A case caught between official findings, public suspicion, and a growing battle over whose version of the truth would ultimately prevail. As investigators continued piecing together Nolan's final hours, the case began changing in a way that many modern investigations do. It stopped being discussed only in interview rooms and evidence labs. It moved online. Within days, Facebook posts, screenshots, TikTok videos, and thousands of comments began filling the gaps that official investigators hadn't yet filled. Some people were simply trying to understand what happened. Others became convinced they already knew. One series of screenshots spread faster than almost anything else. The posts appeared to come from someone claiming they had been on Horn Island that day. The person alleged there had been a confrontation involving Nolan over a cell phone. They claimed several teenagers were involved, that Nolan repeatedly called out for his mother, and that he was later seen injured near the pool area before events unfolded even further. The posts named individuals and described specific actions, leading many online to treat the story as if it had already been proven. But there was one major problem. None of those allegations have been verified by investigators. In fact, as the screenshots continued circulating, other social media users began searching for the alleged witness themselves. Some claimed they couldn't locate the account on Facebook or Instagram. Others questioned whether the account was genuine at all. Almost overnight, the internet wasn't only investigating Nolan's death. It was investigating the credibility of someone claiming to be a witness. This is one of the most fascinating and dangerous aspects of human psychology. When people are desperate for answers, confidence often becomes more persuasive than evidence. A detailed story feels believable because our brains naturally assume that specificity equals truth. But investigations don't work that way. Detectives don't ask whether a story is convincing. They ask whether it can be corroborated. That may explain why the Jackson County Sheriff's Office made one request over and over again. Not opinions, not screenshots, original photos, original videos, original files. If an altercation occurred, investigators needed to know exactly when it happened, who was present, what happened before it began, and what happened after it ended. An edited clip posted online may capture only seconds. The original recording could reveal minutes that completely change its meaning. At the same time, the case expanded beyond questions of evidence and entered a much larger conversation. Nolan was the only black teenager visible in widely shared photos from that friend group. After attorney Ben Crump joined the family's legal team, he openly acknowledged why trust had become such a central issue. He referenced Mississippi's painful civil rights history, including the murder of Emmett Till, arguing that many families, particularly black families, carry understandable concerns about whether every investigation will be handled with complete transparency. Those comments immediately drew national attention. Some people became convinced Nolan's race explained everything. Others argued race had nothing to do with the case at all. The local NAACP urged the public to demand a thorough investigation, while also cautioning against reaching conclusions before the evidence did. Meanwhile, the mother of one of Nolan's friends publicly stated that her family had begun receiving threats, showing how quickly public suspicion can spill over onto people who have not been charged with any crime. Then came perhaps the cruelest twist of all. As Nolan's mother, Christine Wells Wansley, pleaded for answers, someone created an AI-generated video using her likeness to spread false information about her own son's death. Imagine grieving the loss of your child, while also being forced to publicly deny words you never spoke. Psychologists call this information overload. When genuine evidence, rumors, manipulated media, and emotional reactions collide, people often stop asking, "Is this true?" and begin asking, "Does this fit what I already believe?" And that's exactly where the Nolan Wells case found itself. The louder the internet became, the harder it was to hear the facts still waiting to emerge. By the time you're watching this, there are still questions that no official report has fully answered. The final autopsy findings, the toxicology results, the complete timeline of Nolan's last known movements, and perhaps most importantly, what really happened between the smiling photographs taken that afternoon and the moment Nolan disappeared. Until those answers arrive, several possibilities remain on the table. The first is the one investigators initially appear to consider most likely, that Nolan became separated from his friends and accidentally drowned. On the surface, it seems plausible. Horn Island is remote. The Gulf's currents can be unpredictable. Heat, dehydration, fatigue, alcohol, or even a single misjudgment can become deadly. Every year, experienced swimmers and athletes lose their lives in the water. Physical strength doesn't make someone immune to drowning. But that explanation leaves some people asking why Nolan, described by those closest to him as a strong swimmer and a college athlete, never found another ride or made it back to shore. It also doesn't answer why investigators specifically sought footage of an alleged altercation. Another possibility is that Nolan experienced a medical emergency before entering the water. Without complete autopsy and toxicology findings, investigators cannot publicly rule out or confirm that possibility. Medical events can occur suddenly, even in young adults, and sometimes leave very few immediate external signs. Then there's a possibility that continues to generate the most public debate. Could an argument have played some role in what happened afterward? Right now, there is no public evidence proving that any reported altercation caused Nolan's death. Investigators have asked for original videos and eyewitness information, but asking for evidence is not the same as reaching a conclusion. It's a reminder that good investigations follow facts, not assumptions. Perhaps the most honest answer is also the hardest one to accept. We simply don't know. And psychologically, that's one of the most uncomfortable positions the human mind can occupy. Our brains are wired to complete unfinished stories. When important details are missing, we instinctively fill the gaps with our own experiences, beliefs, and emotions. If we already distrust institutions, we may see a cover-up. If we believe people generally tell the truth, we may accept the first explanation we hear. This is known as confirmation bias, the tendency to favor information that supports what we already believe while overlooking information that challenges it. The Nolan Wells case has become a powerful example of that process. Some people are convinced foul play occurred. Others believe it was a tragic accident. Many remain somewhere in the middle, waiting for evidence instead of certainty. Perhaps the most important lesson from this case isn't about choosing a side. It's about recognizing how quickly uncertainty can divide people. A grieving family wants answers. Friends insist they have cooperated. Investigators continue collecting evidence. Social media races ahead with theories before the investigation can catch up. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise is an 18-year-old young man whose life ended far too soon. No matter where the evidence ultimately leads, one fact will never change. A family lost a son. Friends lost someone they cared about. A community lost a young man whose future was just beginning. As this investigation continues, the truth deserves the time and care it takes to uncover it. Whether that truth confirms suspicions, challenges assumptions, or tells a story no one expected. So now we'd like to hear from you. When two witnesses remember the same afternoon differently, does it mean someone is lying, or could trauma and stress genuinely shape memory in different ways? What do you make of investigators requesting original footage of the reported altercation? Do you think the internet helps investigations by keeping public attention on them, or can online speculation make it harder to separate fact from fiction? And perhaps the biggest question of all, what piece of evidence do you believe could finally bring clarity to Nolan Wells' final hours? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. Remember that this is an active investigation, and real people are living with its consequences every day. Let's keep the conversation thoughtful, evidence-based, and compassionate. If you believe stories where secrets, justice, and humanity collide deserve careful investigation, subscribe to Mystora Crimes and turn on notifications. We'll continue following this case and bring you verified updates as new information emerges. Because sometimes the biggest mystery isn't what we know. It's what we're still waiting to learn.